You want to take a drink? Go ahead.
Yeah. I was about to
we're going to restart. Lucky for you.
I was like, blew his opening. Sorry.
No. Yours is full. Mine is empty. So we'll see how this goes. Welcome to the Digital Ministry Podcast. My name is Nick. I'm your host, and I'm here with a good friend, Mark Appleton, who's the Vice President of Internet Evangelism for Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, an organization that I'm sure many of our listeners have heard of or have some familiarity with. Mark, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Nick. Looking forward to chatting with you today. Appreciate it. I appreciate you making the time. I mean, we've worked on digital ministry together in a number of, capacities, all the way back to, I think I was trying to think about this, this morning. It was our first interaction when you attended an MII training. Or did we know each other? Possibly. I think I maybe crossed paths with you briefly before that, but that was the first time I think we really talked and connected a little more in depth. And we went to that MII training in London, and it was really beneficial to us as we were starting to launch into some new spaces in the Middle East. And I think that was it.
Well, what you and the team have done, under your leadership, and you're very humble, so correct me if I'm wrong. I know you will, but I think that you've led this effort with BGEA, and I've just loved watching it expand and seeing what the Lord's doing through your ministry, through digital media. There's a lot to catch up on today.
It is. Yeah. I mean, it's been in the space for 12 years now. Didn't initially lead it, but was on the initial team here from the very beginning, and have been leading since 2015, and just privileged to see God work through us, God work through you, other organizations that we've come alongside the past decade. And it's pretty humbling situation to be in. Or, I mean, we think about, in history, has there ever been the technological innovation condensed in the season that we live in and the gospel opportunity that we have? I don't think it has ever existed. And then to be in positions where we get to contribute to that in organizations that are speaking into that and trying to steward it, pretty humbling, pretty awesome thing to get to do.
Often in an effort to drive focus towards the need for like discipleship and meaningful engagement, I tend to throw away the reach opportunity. And this is something my own team has criticized me of in the past. And I understand it, because I'm like, reach isn't the problem. This is
right.
But just to like pause for a second, I do appreciate, what you're saying. I think that what a privileged time and space to live in, with the tools that we have available. I mean, what's that? You guys, yours is a very large organization with a global footprint. Tell me a little bit more about your perspective on that. I mean, you guys are reaching people all over the world. Help us understand what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. Well, I tell our team there's only a handful of these jobs in the world, and I don't say that like with arrogance. It's just that kind of keep perspective and humility and a sense of stewardship. When BGA seeks the Lord, what should we do? We're literally looking at planet Earth, and that's a privilege. So we currently have digital ministries in seven languages, and volunteer base that serves in those ministries of about 1,600. So I think it's 1,632 or something around there. They all live in about 40 countries around the world right now. And so, to sum up what we do, and this is Digital Ministry Podcast, we take kind of the principles of Billy Graham's evangelism and apply it online. So gather an audience, share the gospel with them, invite them to respond to that, show them what it looks like to begin to walk in faith with Jesus and direct them into local communities of faith. So what Billy Graham did over and over again in stadiums and communities around the world, obviously it looks very different digitally, but replicate those principles and those ideas online. And that's what we've been doing. And like I said, we're doing 7 languages now. We're piloting a couple others right now, seeing where the Lord would lead us next. That's the 30,000 foot view.
Is it as simple as that to just take that evangelistic model that was established, in person and then expanded to stadium events and duplicate it in a digital environment? Does it work that way?
Yes and no. I mean, the steps are simplistically there in the sense of, our stadium, right, is our web properties, websites, social media properties. We don't send buses into the community and mobilize a local church to fill the stadium, but we use Google and Meta ads and digital strategies to fill our stadium. And then we're trying to engage those people with our volunteer base. And so in some ways it's simple and since we're just trying to gather an audience and talk to them about Jesus. But yeah, it looks very different in application. A counselor at a Billy Graham event, they're talking to somebody who heard Mr. Graham's message and is responding to that, and they're kind of confirming. In digital evangelism that we lead, there's more on the volunteer. They're talking the person through the gospel. They're sharing the gospel more directly, and so there's even more equipping and encouraging as those folks they're in the trenches as the evangelists as well. So,
Mark, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about Billy Graham's connection and partnership with the church, and you just kind of went through that evangelism process, and really it's intended to see people come into some type of long-term, meaningful church relationship or engagement with their local faith community. That's often the criticism with digital ministry, is that somebody somewhere is being reached and then they're just left to languish. Has that been a challenge for you guys? And if so, how do you address it?
Yeah, great question. Definitely a challenge. But that doesn't take away the legitimacy of the opportunity, right? So just because something's hard doesn't mean it's not worthwhile or we shouldn't pursue it. But the organization from the beginning, the evangelist serves the church. Evangelists are a gift to the church, Ephesians 4. And so the evangelism doesn't function independently. It is a gift given to the church for the church. As people are saved, they are to be built up in the church. So digitally, that is harder because the very thing that makes it easy for us to connect with people, the things that we leverage as an opportunity, the anonymity, the accessibility, make it hard to bring people out into that fuller relationship. Those of us who've been doing this for years know that, and it makes sense. But it does happen. People do build relationship digitally. So I think the process can take longer in some circumstances, but they build trust with people through digital communication, just like you do building trust with your neighbor over time, having conversations with them. And so we can do that digitally. We can engage with people. We can lead them to the next steps that are good for them. And hopefully, the ultimate end goal is that they end up in a relationship with flesh and blood with other brothers and sisters in Christ at the end. That is hard for us. The numbers do get smaller and smaller the further down that funnel you go, but it is something we've never let go of as our priority and a focus. It looks different in different contexts for us. In the English ministry, we have a church locator, a tool you can go online, and there's a map and you can find churches. And I believe over 20,000 people went and visited specific church websites this year so far through that. So that's kind of like the most passive, just accessibility model. And then we have more organic, proactive situations like in the Middle East, where we're connecting people who will meet up in more confidential situations for their own protection. And it's very one-on-one and more of an organic kind of process there. But the value is there across the board. And it's something that we've said we won't let go of. And we could just kind of back up and say, well, let's just engage with here and not worry about that part. But we just don't see that as an option because our evangelism is supposed to serve the church. So,
yeah, I think that's a great. It's more than a perspective; it's more like a ethos for BGEA. And you yourself are a pastor. You're seminary graduate, ordained pastor. So this is not just kind of theory, like a digital internet evangelism person talking about theory. Like you're working day to day in a church context as well. Yeah,
and that does give me a lot of grounding. I think I mentioned that before our conversation here. I mean, I get it. There's lots of good conversations to be had about, well, are the digital communities sufficient and okay in certain contexts? Is that better than nothing? And my personal opinion is, that's better than nothing when there aren't other options, but we should always be kind of driving people eventually to know people in flesh and blood and live out their faith with them. Because I just think that there's a theology of mankind embedded in that. Those are some kind of detailed theological discussions we could go down. People in this space have them. It's valid to talk about that stuff because we want to use this stuff. We want to use it wisely and biblically. But that's where we're at. It's hard, but keep pushing them towards relationship. Yeah.
And well, let's lean into that a little bit more because, and this is one of the things, I mean, I've gone back and forth on this, on one hand, you could say, well, the people that are being reached digitally or those that are maybe seeking, answers online, Google's really good at telling you where the local church is, but they're not looking for like, where's my local church? Or maybe it's that it's not Sunday morning at 10 a.m., when they're asking the question. Like, what's your perspective of bridging that gap? I guess so often I've seen that when people are reached through some type of digital ministry, they're not like quote unquote church people, or sometimes there's even an aversion to going to church. But you're not talking about church like a building or program. You're using the words relationship. How do you square that? How do you bridge that?
Well, it's a good question, and the answer is different in different contexts. So I try to talk about it in a way that bridges 7 languages and cultures and the globe, right? Because I'm trying to lead everybody towards the same thing. But you're right. In the middle of the United States, someone on our English website possibly has some context for a church or a church relationship that has wounded them, or like you said, is either anti-church for what they think it means, possibly even politically or relationally. And so that's a different circumstance than someone in the Middle East or other cultures that we work in where they're eager. Yes, I want to meet somebody else. I want to go meet up with them. I want to be a part of this community. So I guess the problem is different depending on the culture. That's why I try to talk about it in the kind of more general terms, so it's applicable across all of our teams.
There's a follow-up element to the outreach effort that you guys are doing. People can connect with somebody personally to have a conversation, just take next steps. How much of those engagements are handled by volunteers versus BGEA staff?
In our digital ministry, it's entirely volunteer. And so our staff we look at it like we're setting the table for the ministry, the volunteers and the seekers, searchers online. So all of our ministry correspondence, those gospel conversations are having by those teams. And that's a huge value of our kind of strategy in general right now. I mean, we still drive a lot of web traffic. We still count people who are indicating a response on those websites and who ask for our discipleship materials. But we are prioritizing ad traffic that is generating more dialogue with our volunteers. And we've been getting better and better at figuring out how to do that well. And in fact, we've created other problems for ourselves. So we're not handling the traffic as well. Now we're creating more and more engagements and our volunteers can't keep up with it. So good problem to have, but yeah, that's a huge value of ours, of that person-to-person relationship, getting somebody to talk to somebody. The problem is that that's not as scalable as just sending people to to websites or to interact with digital assets, passively. You can get millions of people to do that. Yeah.
So are you recruiting volunteers right now then?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If people have a heart for that, want to try it, engage in it, searchforjesus.net is kind of the entry point for us. But it is a process to go through. So it's like applying to get a job, really. We go through background checks and application process. There's all kinds of training. So if any of your listeners are considering that, just that's up front. That's the expectation. But then you get deployed to have gospel conversations with folks all over the world or disciple them in online courses. So yeah, we've seen a lot of fruit in the ministry this year and grateful for it. So
what are some of the challenges that team's facing responding to people that are coming in online? I mean, is there kind of a theme that you're seeing these days?
I was talking to somebody yesterday about this, or not yesterday, a couple of days ago. In 10, 12 years, it feels like the conversations don't change that much. There's ebbs and flows.
I can't think of any other area of life where a statement like that would be true right now.
But it's just the intensity. So when we're having this conversation, I think the themes are the same. The intensity feels like it's been increasing past 2 or 3 years. So when I say that, I'm talking about desperation, hope, confusion, frustration. At the end of the day, most of our conversations come from people feeling disoriented by these things of life, right? So circumstantial, whether wars going on in the world or my husband is dying or I lost my job, disorienting events that kind of shake the foundations. And that's what I mean. It's kind of been the same. Obviously, the specifics change month to month, year to year, but at the core, they're the same conversations. But I do feel like the intensity, almost like the depth of the people are feeling and are afraid, feels like it's getting worse and worse. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah. I mean, at my church, we were having a conversation about the youth group yesterday. I was talking to the youth pastor and just some of the things that kids are struggling with, and it's heavy stuff that, we weren't having these conversations even 3 or 4 years ago. I think with Gen Z, COVID did some stuff that we're still just trying to figure out, or exploring. Absolutely. But it sounds like maybe you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those conversations certainly are more unique in our day. But yeah, I think just kind of the desperation of human need is increasing. And I think it feels like people are less equipped to handle it. Like people have less resilience, so they feel more rocked by all the things that are happening. Sorry if there's spotlight here. The sun just came through my window over there, so I'm glowing on this side now.
You look great. So, how do you equip? How many volunteers do you have?
About 1,600.
Wow. So, how do you take a group of 1,600 people and equip them to have these intense conversations that you're describing?
Yeah, well, they go through a bunch of training. So there's online training, kind of self-guided courses they go through. Then they actually do we call it hands-on training. They're doing mock conversations with trainers, talk through scenarios. Yep. So they all go through that process before they're deployed and get live chats. The length of that kind of depends on the skill of the person, and it's not like they're doing that for months, but they do go through some scenarios to just get them comfortable, get us comfortable. And then there's ongoing feedback. So we're reviewing 10% of our conversations, roughly. We have quarterly feedback to all the volunteers to go back to them. Here's what's strong. Here's where maybe some suggestions.
Like individual coaching?
Individual coaching for each one. Yeah, for all of them.
I didn't know you guys were doing this. That's crazy.
Yeah. So that's all done through a network of volunteer leaders. So that's how we can multiply it. So we have area team leaders who are volunteers who lead teams of 15 to 20 volunteers. And those volunteer leaders do the coaching of their teams. So we're feeding them kind of these review reports based on the data we have. And then they're having the coaching conversation. So it's kind of part of a secondary part of our mission statement as well as an organization. We proclaim the gospel. We support Franklin Graham's evangelistic calling. We use every effective means possible, right? That's digital evangelism. And then we're also equipping the church to do the same. So that's why I feel like it's a valuable investment for us, because we're actually training and equipping all these people to do evangelism, not just for us, but in their own lives. And they're all getting better at it. And so, so all that's happening. It is a pretty high level of investment. We do occasional webinars on specific topics that if we see people struggling with. We put out other video trainings that aren't in their initial training, just to kind of keep them thinking about things and keep them improving. So
yeah, so that's fascinating. I mean, what an effort! I'm really encouraged to hear that. So let's look at the counterpart for that conversation, the people that are being reached. I mean, how are you? I heard you mention ads before, so there's some ad dollars there. Are these website landing pages? Is it a YouTube strategy? I mean, what are you guys leaning into today in order to really share that opportunity with people to connect?
Yeah, so we're volunteer. Probably all of the above. Still heavy in Google Ad Network, but more and more in the Meta ad world, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We have some of our languages growing in that. So Arabic is the one language that started an intentional YouTube strategy this year. And he's got 200,000 subscribers. He started the year with like 15,000 and he was trying to hit 100,000 by the year, and he's at 200. He's a really gifted guy. And so we've got a little bit of everything going on. I would say one of kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but we've been testing out some things, trying to reduce what we call our no response category. So these are people that wrote in a question. Our volunteers engaged with them, responded, and then kind of it went away, right? Sometimes those percentages can be pretty high, up to like half of the messages. They don't really engage with us in a longer conversation. So we just ran a test recently that instituted just some simple, they respond to the ad. They have to answer a simple question before they get entered into the dialogue. And just doing that in this small test, I think it was only about 600 or 1,000 people, but we dropped that no response rate down to like 10 to 20%, and it was at like 50% in that market group. And so trying to demonstrate some things like that. When a message comes to a volunteer, we want it to be the most profitable conversation that they could spend their time in. And so just testing tactics like that to try to keep improving and increasing that engagement.
How big's your team that's running that? That sounds like some pretty in-depth analytics there, some analysis. How many people are doing that?
That particular test was just one social media guy working with the English team. The whole team here is about 33 people. Okay. But that's everything, all the languages, managing the volunteers. We only have one full-time social media person on the team. We leverage some other departments in BGA to help us with some of that too. And then we use some contractors as well. So for Arabic and others, we're contracting with some other groups outside that are working with us on projects. And some of them are implementing some of those digital strategies for that language in the different contexts. So we kind of put the team together in a variety of ways.
We haven't talked about team size or anything like that. And I was really curious about what the answer would be. I didn't expect one social media person. That's incredible. But it also, I think, speaks to how much can be done with some of the tools that are available today. I mean, that's some pretty heavy analysis with big results that one person's driving.
Yeah. I mean, he's got some experience. He's fairly new to our team, but he's been doing digital communication strategies for 10 years. And so that helps. But just not to misrepresent it. I mean, some of our language managers are doing their own digital strategies and have some experience in it. So they're just not solely focused on it. That's not their only job. They're doing other things. So there's more than one person involved in managing all those assets, but we don't have a lot of just purely dedicated. Most of our team is dedicated to the kind of the ministry side, the content, the conversations, training the volunteers, overseeing the volunteers. Mm-hmm. So I'd say we are pretty efficient on the front end, driving all that traffic in pretty effective ways without, that's not where the bulk of our personnel and investment is. So.
How much are you guys looking at kind of who's responding, who's coming through, trying to understand, why did they engage, and then feeding that back into a content strategy? Is that an element at play here?
It's starting to. So that guy that I was just mentioning, who's fairly new, he's starting to remarket to kind of warm audiences and seeing a lot of benefit from that. Actually, some of that engagement that has just gone up the second half of the year is because he's starting to play around with some of that. And more and more of our traffic is talking to us now, which is great. So now we're trying to steward that well.
What's the plan for volunteer recruitment? It sounds like you guys have, great opportunity. Some might say a good problem to have from a ministry standpoint.
Yeah. So we're just kind of stepping into two sides. Obviously recruitment, getting the word out, but then we're trying to lean out some of our process, get folks deployed faster. Some of those types of things. It's in some ways we can only go as fast as we can. We have some principles we're not going to let die in that process. There's a reason why it's a thorough process. We ascribe to this. It's not really a philosophy. It's a curriculum that is volunteer consultants call high impact volunteer management. It's basically like you're better off investing in fewer, more qualified, called people than just saying, hey, everybody jump in and do what you can. You actually expend less energy and are more effective in the long term. And those are kind of the rails we've run on for the last 10, 12 years, and it's worked well. But it also means we're slower to ramp up. We don't just throw bodies at it. So,
right. So imagine the opposite is true. Imagine you've got this giant team that's ineffective and, hard to manage. How would somebody go from that to what you've described? What's the first step?
First step. Clarifying ministry expectations, perhaps. You'd have to clarify what you're expecting them to do, and then maybe communicate to them where they're at. And obviously, you got to show grace to people and not just spring things on them. But I would probably give kind of a timeline that if you're not engaged by this point to this level, then probably isn't the right ministry for you. That's kind of the way we talk about it. It's not a criticism of the person. A lot of times this just isn't the right thing for them. That's okay. So let's just be honest and serve each other well by them going to do something that they're more called and gifted to do, and us finding other people to do it. So yeah, I would encourage folks to clarify those expectations, communicate them, and then just be disciplined to hold to it and not be afraid to rip that Band-Aid off. And it says, okay, if you give people 4 months or 6 months and they really didn't come through, that you are better off to move on and recruit some new folks. That feels probably scary because it feels like this, but it's a false positive, right? It's like, it feels like this great asset, but if it's absorbing all energy and it's not actually producing fruitful ministry, it's actually not what you feel like it is. And so it's okay to take the courageous step to let go of some of that. Or
you and I have talked about and reviewed in the past some of the high level kind of ministry metrics, some more like the reach and, the outcomes that you're seeing out of your outreach efforts. I think this volunteer team that you've built here is fascinating. I didn't realize to what extent you've built kind of a process and a replicable process to bring people into a real ministry opportunity, for themselves, to be able to, and it reminds me of, my wife was an online missionary, before I ever got involved in any of this stuff. And I would come home at night and just see, she's sharing her faith and ministering to people, on her laptop at the kitchen table. I was like, what is going on here? This is crazy.
What is that?
But, and my first question, naively, it was like, is somebody going to show up at our house? Like who's going to knock on the door, and say, hey, are you the one messaging me? But I think you've created really an incredible opportunity here. And it's something that you and the team should be proud of. And thankful for 1,600 people that are engaged in this digital ministry with you around the world. That is amazing.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It is. So last week for these meetings we just pulled some fun stats up. Let me just, you'd probably be encouraged and blown away by a couple of these. So some of our volunteers who have done the most messaging in this year, we have one Spanish volunteer from Colombia. She has sent 88,571 replies this year in 2020. And one of our Arabic coaches, 65,739 messages. So those are probably a combination of like Facebook message, WhatsApp, but individual messages, replies to people. And that Arabic coach is actually a volunteer team leader too. And she's written 65,000 messages. I mean, it's just the level of investment some of these people have, and just, it's really a calling for, I'm blown away when I go to our volunteer events sometimes, and just because we do gather them occasionally for dinners and just encouragement. And I sit here and I think, these people, this is their ministry. They light up about it. It's like, this is what I get to do. And those are the kind of people that God brings around us. And it's pretty awesome to get to see. 65,000 messages in a year. I mean, that's a lot of sacrifice.
I mean, that's the hands and feet of the church, reaching out and sharing the hope of Christ with the world and multiple languages. I love what you built. That's an incredible community of people that are reaching the world. That I don't know. I'm really pretty shocked by that. Good job. Keep it up. It's incredible.
Thanks, Nick.
Mark, I love these chats. Thanks for spending some time today. It's good to see you again and catch up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wish you and the team all the best in 2024 as you guys are continuing to push forward. God bless you in the work.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.